In the quiet and picturesque town of Oxford, Mississippi, life seems to move at a slower, gentler pace. It's a place where the past is cherished, where traditions run deep, and where neighbors are more like family. But beneath the surface of this charming southern town lies a tale so dark, so twisted, that it shattered the very foundations of this close-knit community. This is the story of Evelyn Mae Carter, a woman whose beauty and grace masked a greed so insatiable that it drove her to commit the most heinous of crimes. She wasn't born into evil. She wasn't destined for a life of murder. But the seeds of her dark desires were planted early, in the poverty and despair of her childhood. And as those seeds grew, they twisted her soul, turning her into a predator who preyed on those who loved her most. Evelyn's tale is one of contrasts. A life lived in pursuit of wealth and luxury, yet driven by a desperation that could never be quenched. A life of elegance and refinement on the outside, but on the inside, a festering rot that would ultimately consume her. This is a story of love turned to betrayal, trust shattered by greed, and of a woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Evelyn Mae Carter was born into a world of hardship and struggle, a world far removed from the opulence she would one day crave. The youngest of 3 children, she grew up in a small, run-down house on the outskirts of Oxford, where her father worked long hours at a local factory, and her mother tried her best to stretch a meager income to feed and clothe her family. Life in the Carter household was one of constant struggle. The house, with its peeling paint, creaky floorboards, was a symbol of their poverty. Evelyn's clothes were hand-me-downs from her older siblings, often patched and worn, while her classmates at school flaunted new dresses and shiny shoes. These early experiences of deprivation and envy would leave deep scars on Evelyn's psyche, scars that would never fully heal. But there was one thing that set Evelyn apart from her peers: her determination. Even as a child, she knew she wanted more from life. She wasn't content to accept her lot, and she certainly wasn't going to let poverty define her. She was smart, and she quickly realized that her looks could be her ticket out of the life she despised. From an early age, she learned to use her beauty to get what she wanted, whether it was extra attention from teachers or favors from the boys at school. As she grew older, Evelyn's resentment toward her circumstances only deepened. She watched with envy as her classmates, the children of Oxford's wealthy elite, drove their shiny new cars to school and talked about their family vacations to exotic locations. She was often invited to their homes, where she saw firsthand the kind of life she wanted for herself: life of luxury, comfort, and ease. It was during these years that Evelyn's obsession with wealth began to take hold, an obsession that would drive every decision she made from then on. In high school, Evelyn's beauty blossomed, and she quickly became one of the most popular girls in school. But popularity wasn't enough for Evelyn. She wanted power, she wanted control, and most of all, she wanted out. She dated boys from wealthy families, but none of them could offer her the escape she craved. She needed someone who would give her the life she dreamed of. Someone who could take her away from the poverty and struggle she had known all her life. After graduating from high school, Evelyn knew that college was her best chance at breaking free from her past. She was smart enough to earn a scholarship, which allowed her to attend a small college not far from Oxford. It was here that she met William "Billy" Carter, a young man with big dreams and an even bigger heart. Billy was everything Evelyn had been looking for. He was kind, hardworking, and, most importantly, he had the potential to provide the life Evelyn wanted. He was studying business with the goal of starting his own company one day, and Evelyn quickly realized that he could be her ticket to the life she craved. She set her sights on him, and it wasn't long before Billy was head over heels in love with her. To Billy, Evelyn was the perfect woman: beautiful, intelligent, and supportive of his dreams. He loved her with a passion that blinded him to her flaws, and he believed that together they could conquer the world. After a whirlwind courtship, Billy proposed to Evelyn, and she accepted with a radiant smile. But behind that smile, Evelyn was already calculating her next move. Their wedding was a grand affair, the kind of event that made the front page of the local newspaper. To the outside world, it was a perfect union, a love story for the ages. But to Evelyn, it was a transaction, a means to an end. She played the role of the doting wife perfectly, supporting Billy as he worked tirelessly to build his plumbing business from the ground up. She encouraged him, praised him, and did everything in her power to ensure his success. But all the while, she was planning for the day when his success would become her fortune. As Billy's business grew, so did Evelyn's appetite for luxury. She began spending extravagantly. Designer clothes, expensive jewelry, and lavish vacations became the norm. Billy, who was deeply in love with his wife, was happy to indulge her every whim. He worked even harder, determined to give Evelyn the life she deserved. But no matter how much he made, it was never enough for her. Evelyn's spending soon began to spiral out of control. She opened multiple credit cards in Billy's name, maxing them out on high-end purchases that they couldn't afford. Debt piled up, and Evelyn became increasingly desperate. She knew that Billy's business was doing well, but it wasn't enough to support the lifestyle she wanted. She needed more, and she was willing to do whatever it took to get it. It was during this time that Evelyn first began to consider the unthinkable. She knew that Billy had a substantial life insurance policy, one that would pay out a significant sum if anything were to happen to him. At first, the idea was just a fleeting thought, something she quickly dismissed. But as the bills piled up and the creditors began calling, thought returned, stronger this time, more insistent. Evelyn began to research ways to make her dark fantasy a reality. She spent hours online, reading about poisons and how they could be used to cause a death that would appear natural. She learned about slow-acting poisons that could be administered over time, causing organ failure that would be difficult to detect. The more she read, the more obsessed she became. It was the perfect plan. Billy would die, and she would be free to collect the insurance money, pay off her debts, and start over. She started small, adding tiny amounts of the poison to Billy's food and drink. At first the effects were barely noticeable. A slight fatigue, a little nausea, nothing that raised any alarms. But as the weeks went on, Billy's health began to deteriorate. He started losing weight, his skin became pale and clammy, and he was plagued by constant headaches and stomach pain. Evelyn played the concerned wife to perfection, insisting that Billy see a doctor, even though she knew they wouldn't find anything. Billy underwent a battery of tests. The results were inconclusive. The doctors couldn't explain his symptoms, and Billy, trusting his wife implicitly, believed her when she told him it was probably just stress. As Billy's condition worsened, Evelyn increased the dosage. She watched with cold detachment as the man who loved her more than anything in the world slowly wasted away before her eyes. And when the end finally came, she was ready. Billy passed away in his sleep, his body too weak to fight off the effects of the poison. The cause of death was ruled as natural causes, organ failure from an unknown illness. Evelyn's plan had worked perfectly. With Billy gone, Evelyn wasted no time in cashing in his life insurance policy. The money was more than enough to pay off her debts and allow her to live the life she had always dreamed of. But instead of feeling satisfied, Evelyn found herself wanting more. The taste of wealth had only whetted her appetite, and she began to crave the thrill of the kill. After Billy's death, Evelyn was the picture of grief. She played the role of the grieving widow so convincingly that no one in Oxford had any reason to suspect her. Friends and neighbors rallied around her, offering their condolences and support. Among them was Dave Lawson, Billy's best friend. Dave had always been fond of Evelyn. He had watched from the sidelines as she and Billy built their life together, and he had admired the way she stood by her husband's side through thick and thin. When Billy died, Dave was heartbroken, not only for the loss of his friend, but also for the pain he saw Evelyn going through. He made it his mission to be there for her, to help her in any way he could. At first, Dave's intentions were purely honorable. He helped Evelyn with the funeral arrangements, took care of the paperwork, and made sure she had everything she needed. But as time went on, his feelings for her began to deepen. Evelyn, always perceptive, noticed this and began to encourage his advances. She knew that Dave had been successful in his career as a car salesman and that he was financially stable. He was the perfect target. It wasn't long before Dave proposed to Evelyn. He believed he was offering her a second chance at happiness, a way to move on from the tragedy of Billy's death. Evelyn, of course, accepted with a tearful smile. She assured Dave that she would always love Billy, but that she was ready to start a new chapter in her life with him. Their wedding was a quiet, intimate affair, a stark contrast to the grand event that had marked her marriage to Billy. But Evelyn didn't care about the wedding. She had her sights set on the prize, Dave's money. Once they were married, she wasted no time in resuming her lavish lifestyle. She bought new clothes, redecorated the house, and even convinced Dave to take her on a European vacation. Dave, who was deeply in love with Evelyn, was happy to indulge her. He believed that after everything she had been through, she deserved to be pampered. But as the bills began to pile up, Dave started to worry. He wasn't as wealthy as Billy had been, and Evelyn's spending was quickly draining his savings. He tried to talk to her about it, but Evelyn brushed off his concerns, telling him not to worry and that everything would be fine. But Evelyn knew that things were far from fine. The money she had inherited from Billy was almost gone, and she was once again drowning in debt. The stress began to take its toll on her, and she started to feel the walls closing in. She knew she needed a way out, and fast, and once again she turned to the idea that had saved her before: murder. This time, Evelyn was more confident. She had done it once before, and she was sure she could do it again. She chose the same poison, knowing it had worked so effectively on Billy. She began administering it to Dave, just as she had done with her first husband, starting with small doses and gradually increasing them over time. Dave, like Billy, began to experience the same mysterious symptoms: fatigue, nausea, and unexplained pain. He visited the doctor multiple times, but the tests were inconclusive. The doctors were baffled, and Dave, who had always been healthy, couldn't understand what was happening to him. Evelyn, meanwhile, played the role of the concerned wife to perfection, insisting that they would get through this together. But unlike Billy, Dave was more suspicious. Couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He began to question everything, including Evelyn's behavior. He noticed that she seemed unusually calm, almost detached, as if she was waiting for something to happen. He started to wonder if there was more to his illness than the doctors were telling him. As Dave's condition worsened, Evelyn decided it was time to finish what she had started. She increased the dosage of the poison, confident that it would soon be over. But in her haste, she made a critical error. She miscalculated the dosage, causing Dave to become violently ill. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors worked frantically to save his life. Despite their best efforts, Dave died a few days later, his body too weak to recover from the effects of the poison. Once again, the cause of death was ruled as natural causes, and once again, Evelyn was free to collect on the life insurance policy. But this time, something was different. Dave's death had been too sudden, too dramatic, and it had left too many unanswered questions. By the time Evelyn met Mike Stevens, she had become an expert at deception. She had played the role of the grieving widow twice now, and each time she had emerged wealthier and more confident in her ability to manipulate those around her. But Mike was different. He was smart, cautious, and more observant than her previous husband. Evelyn met Mike at a charity event in Oxford. He was a successful financial advisor, well-respected in the community, and known for his sharp mind and keen instinct. He was also recently divorced, which made him an ideal target for Evelyn's next scheme. She charmed him with her beauty and grace, and before long, they were dating. But unlike Billy and Dave, Mike was not so easily swayed. He noticed things. Little things, at first, like the way Evelyn seemed to know exactly what she wanted from their relationship, or how she always seemed to be just a little too eager to talk about her financial situation. He was also aware of the rumors that had begun to circulate around town about Evelyn's past. People whispered that she had been too lucky, too many times, and that maybe there was more to her story than met the eye. Evelyn, of course, dismissed the rumors as idle gossip. She told Mike that people were just jealous of her success. They couldn't stand to see a woman doing well for herself. But Mike wasn't convinced. He decided to keep a closer eye on Evelyn, to see if there was any truth to the rumors. As their relationship progressed, Evelyn began to feel the pressure. Her debts were once again spiraling out of control, and she knew she needed to act fast. She convinced Mike to marry her, telling him that it would help them both financially, and that they could build a new life together. Mike, who had grown fond of Evelyn despite his reservations, agreed. Their marriage was not as smooth as Evelyn had hoped. Mike's suspicions grew as he began to notice inconsistencies in Evelyn's stories. Questioned her about her spending habits, about the life insurance policies she had taken out on her previous husbands, and about the circumstances of their deaths. Evelyn, feeling the walls closing in, decided that it was time to act. But this time, Evelyn was desperate. She knew she couldn't afford to wait for the poison to take effect slowly, as she had done with Billy and Dave. She needed the money now, before Mike uncovered the truth. So she increased the dosage, hoping to hasten his death and cash in on the insurance money before it was too late. But Evelyn's haste proved to be her undoing. Mike fell ill almost immediately, his symptoms more severe and more pronounced than those of her previous victim. He was rushed to the hospital, where doctors quickly realized that he had been poisoned. They managed to stabilize him, but his condition was critical. It was during this time that Dr. Sarah Jennings, the attending physician, began to connect the dots. She had seen cases like this before, and she knew the signs of poisoning when she saw them. She ordered a toxicology report, which confirmed her suspicion. Mike had been poisoned with the same substance that had killed Billy and Dave. Dr. Jennings immediately contacted the authorities, who began investigating Evelyn's past. What they found was a chilling pattern of deceit and murder. They discovered the life insurance policies, financial records that showed Evelyn's escalating debt, and the similarities between the deaths of her 3 husbands. It was enough to warrant Evelyn's arrest. When the police arrived at Evelyn's home, she was calm, almost indifferent. She believed that she had covered her tracks well enough, that there was no way they could prove she was responsible for the deaths of her husband. But as the evidence against her mounted, Evelyn's confidence began to waver. She was charged with the attempted murder of Mike Stevens and the murders of Billy Carter and Dave Lawson. The investigation into Evelyn Mae Carter's past was one of the most thorough in the history of Mississippi law enforcement. Detective Mark Williams, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving difficult cases, was put in charge of the case. As he reviewed the evidence, he quickly realized that they were dealing with a cold-blooded killer who had managed to evade justice for years. Williams began by interviewing everyone who had known Evelyn, from her neighbors to her coworkers to the doctors who had treated her husbands. What he found was a pattern of manipulation and deceit that had allowed Evelyn to get away with murder not once, twice before. He discovered that Evelyn had opened multiple credit cards in her husband's names, maxing them out on luxury purchases that they couldn't afford. He also found that Evelyn had been planning to leave town after Mike's death, using the life insurance money to start a new life in another state. But the most damning evidence came from the toxicology report. The poison that had killed Billy and Dave was the same substance that had nearly killed Mike, and it was found in Evelyn's home, hidden in a bottle of vitamins. This was the smoking gun that Williams needed to charge Evelyn with murder. Evelyn's arrest sent shockwaves through Oxford. The woman who had been seen as a grieving widow was now being accused of being a calculating murderer. The town was divided. Some believed that Evelyn was innocent, that she was being framed, while others were convinced that she was guilty. The trial that followed was one of the most sensational in Mississippi's history, with media from all over the country descending on the small town to cover the case. In court, Evelyn maintained her innocence, claiming that she had been framed by someone who wanted to destroy her. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. Prosecution presented a detailed case, showing how Evelyn had used the same poison to kill Billy and Dave, and how she had planned to do the same to Mike. They also presented evidence of Evelyn's financial troubles, arguing that she had killed her husbands to collect their life insurance money and pay off her debts. Evelyn's defense tried to paint her as a victim of circumstance, a woman who had been driven to desperate measures by financial hardship. But the jury wasn't convinced. After just a few hours of deliberation, they returned a guilty verdict on all counts. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read. Evelyn Mae Carter, once the belle of Oxford, now sat in chains, her face pale and drawn. She showed no emotion as the judge sentenced her to death by lethal injection, her only reaction a slight tightening of her jaw. As the gavel fell, the weight of her crimes finally seemed to sink in. The woman who had spent her life chasing after wealth and luxury had lost everything: freedom, her reputation, and the lives of the men who had loved her. Evelyn was led out of the courtroom in silence, her head held high, but her eyes empty. But the story doesn't end there. The impact of Evelyn's crimes rippled through Oxford for years to come. Town, once so proud of its southern charm and hospitality, was left reeling from the betrayal of one of its own. Families who had known Evelyn for years struggled to reconcile the woman they thought they knew with the monster she had become. As for Mike Stevens, he recovered from his ordeal. The scars, both physical and emotional, would stay with him for the rest of his life. He became an advocate for victims of domestic abuse, using his experience to help others who had suffered at the hands of someone they loved. Evelyn's execution was carried out quietly, with little fanfare. She declined her final meal, choosing instead to spend her last hours in silence. As the lethal injection was administered, her eyes remained open, staring blankly at the ceiling. In her final moments, there was no sign of remorse, no hint of the woman she had once been. She died as she had lived, lone, cold, and utterly consumed by her own greed. In the years that followed, Evelyn Mae Carter became a cautionary tale, a story that parents told their children to warn them of the dangers of greed and the lengths some people will go to achieve their desires. And in Oxford, Mississippi, her name became synonymous with betrayal, a dark stain on the town's history that would never be fully erased. Evelyn's story serves as a reminder that evil can lurk in the most unexpected places, that even the most charming and beautiful people can harbor dark secrets. And it is a reminder that, in the end, greed and deception can only lead to destruction.